Next fluid I want to talk about is what some of you might call radiator fluid. It's actually called coolant or antifreeze. So mine has an overflow tank where you can see the level. So I have a cold fill line, and you see mine is full right now. You never want to open the cap when it's hot, or you will get coolant on you. So there is not a universal color, unfortunately. Some vehicles it's going to be kind of a light green color, some kind of a goldish yellow color. You might find an orange or red, heck, there might even be a blue. And basically that's because the manufacturer specified different grades. Me personally, I use the universal coolant, and I've had no issues with that, using it in every vehicle I own. So I'm not saying that you should ignore the specification on your vehicle. I'm just saying, for me personally, I've had great results using the universal coolant. And I get a lot of flack for doing it in my videos, because I think people are assuming that I'm using the old-fashioned green antifreeze instead of the new universal one. So if you don't have an overflow tank like this, then you may have to wait till your engine's cold. You may have an actual cap on the radiator itself that you can open and make sure there's fluid in there. You may have some other system on your vehicle to check the fluid level. But you always want to make sure that you have proper coolant in the system. So why is it important to check the coolant level? Well, if it runs out and your engine overheats, you're going to have catastrophic engine failure, probably several $1,000s worth of repairs and or replacement parts. So it's cheap insurance to keep that coolant level filled and flushed regularly. So the coolant does several things. It flows through the engine when the water pump is running, and it obviously cools the engine down so that it doesn't overheat. Number two, it acts as your heat. So part of it will run to what we call the heater core, and if you turn your heat on, it allows the air to pass through that heater core and absorb some of the heat. So that's a little trick you can use. If your car is overheating, you can turn the heat on full blast, and it's kind of a secondary radiator, and it may get you safely to where you need to go. Obviously, I don't recommend running an overheating engine because of the potential for catastrophic failure, but if you're in a pinch and you need to get away, that may get you a few extra miles. So most manufacturers are going to recommend a specific coolant schedule where it needs to be drained and refilled. If you're doing it yourself, obviously you want about a 50-50 mix of distilled water and antifreeze. Don't use anything other than distilled water. And the purpose of the antifreeze is to extend the temperature range of the coolant. So if you just use distilled water, it's going to freeze at one point about 30 degrees, give or take, and it's going to boil into steam at another point, roughly around 100 degrees. By adding the antifreeze in, you extend those points so that it can remain a liquid well over 200 degrees and also below zero. So you may need to mix your formula a little bit differently if you live in a more extreme climate that is going to require more antifreeze and less distilled water. But generally about a 50-50 mix is a safe bet. Antifreeze generally has kind of a sweet smell. If you open the cap and you're not getting a sweet smell out of there, it's probably time to change it. Again, manufacturers are going to have a recommended schedule for changing it, but if you don't know if it's ever been changed, and you haven't been keeping good records on that, then smell test is going to be your next best thing. And honestly, there's probably no harm in changing it too soon, so if you have any doubts, I would go ahead and change it. The antifreeze portion of the coolant is going to provide corrosion protection, so that is very important. You don't want internal parts of the engine corroding and failing on you at some point. So again, changing it A little bit soon is better than risking it. Most of the time, if you have a coolant leak, it's usually major. You usually have a busted hose somewhere on the hot side, and so you will see steam spewing out of your engine whenever you have a leak. It is possible to have a cold side leak where maybe you just have a drip, trickle that you wouldn't notice, but most of the failures happen on the hot side because those components get so hot and then they fail. And when they fail under the hot, like I said, it's usually steam coming out or it's liquid coming out, but then it hits other parts of the engine that are hot enough to turn it to steam. And you usually will smell the coolant leak possibly even before you see it. So it's usually not something that happens to you that you can drive for miles and miles. It's usually something that happens and you immediately have to pull over and take care of. One of the more common failures on some vehicles is the heater core failing. What happens typically is you'll see coolant leaking on the floorboard of your vehicle, probably on the passenger side. And that is usually not an easy fix. Some of the really older vehicles, like I had an 83 Ford F-250, I could literally just reach up underneath the dash and change the heater core. It's a simple job, but a lot of the newer vehicles you have to remove most of the dash to get to the heater core. If you're doing any kind of work on your HVAC system, I typically would recommend, if you've got all those things out, go ahead and change out your heater core while you're under there, as well as any of the other wear components that are in there, because it's a lot of work to get to it, and then changing them is usually the easy part. So I hope the video was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll try to answer them in a future video. See you in the next video.